COVID-19, oh, it is real. It is real. Oh, it is real. People dying, oh, everywhere. People crying, oh, everywhere.
Hay días en los que no hay mucho que comer. Entonces hay que decidir y mi hermano es la prioridad porque es el más pequeño.
The choice that you make now can decide the future. The things that you do now can make a difference. We don't wanna suffer more. We don't wanna struggle more. Don't wanna suffer more. Living like this.
Ningokia kwa unyautuko. Nando ningokia kuwania skali. Nale akwa atiyemeo ya kafyu.
Our communities must unite. Our leaders got to unite. We got to be ready. Let us make ourselves ready. COVID ready. COVID ready.
तो जिनके पास जो कपड़ा अवेलेबल था जो जैसा था फाड़ के कपड़े सब इधर उधर वही यूज कर रहे थे जो भी जिसके पास सामान था क्योंकि डरे हुए थे ना बहुत तो मांग नहीं रहे थे उनसे कैसे मांगे कैसे बोले कहीं ऐसा ना हो कि हम उनसे मांगे तो मतलब हमें डांट दें हड़काएं इसलिए सब लोग बहुत डरे हुए थे.
We don't wanna struggle more. We don't wanna suffer more. Living like this. COVID-19, it is real, but we are realer, and we are stronger, and we will conquer. We'll conquer.
Here to follow up on progress that has been made.
Today, I am now asking the minister about what progress has been made when it comes to gender equality, especially during this time of COVID-19.
I'm here to ask our Minister of Health what he's doing about that. What will make the difference now is the collective realization, catalyzed by COVID-19, that accountability is a must-have, not a nice-to-have. It must be embedded so that every leader and government is obliged to do what they say they will, with citizens fully able to participate and to claim their rights. When commitments are translated into progress and rights, only then will we live up to our promise to the world's women, children, and adolescents. It is to them that we are all ultimately accountable.
Hello, everyone, and a very warm welcome to you all to the 10th Partnership for Maternal, Newborn and Child Health Accountability Breakfast 2021. A very, very good morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on where in the world you are joining us from. And we are so honored that you've chosen to spend the next 1.5 hours with us. Now, ladies and gentlemen, it is not news that women and girls have been particularly affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. Indeed, there has been progress globally to advance the health and well-being of women, children, and adolescents. But it is not news that in Africa, decades of progress made for this vulnerable group is now under threat because the virus has laid bare serious fault lines in safety, physical and mental health, education, sexual and reproductive health, domestic responsibilities, and employment opportunities. African women and girls continue to play critical roles as frontline health workers, caregivers at home and at work, and as mobilizers in their communities. Many of them, without an iota of idea when they could get the vaccine, a vaccine that all of us are talking about. And they are increasingly putting their health and well-being on the line. Almost all of them are unvaccinated because while the rest of the world is vaccinating their population in millions, Africa is scrambling to get the jab. It is 10 years today since PMNCH started its annual accountability breakfast, and today, which is the first under the new and ambitious PMNCH strategy and at a regional level, today we are demanding for greater accountability to the needs and wants of children, of women and adolescents of Africa. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for seeing how important this conversation is and for choosing to be here. My name is Masi Juma, a correspondent with BBC News in Africa, and I'm coming to you live from Nairobi, and I'm so honored to moderate today's session. Now, in the next 1.5 hours, we will hold ourselves accountable and then hold each other accountable. We will have discussions on promoting accountability around the PMNCH COVID call to action, and we will highlight new commitments and follow up on existing ones, and also look at the role of partnerships and innovation in addressing inequities and accelerating progress. And immediately after this 1.5 hours of the accountability breakfast, I am asking you to join us for another 45 minutes or an hour of the accountability unscripted. Basically, this is an after show that will follow the accountability breakfast immediately, and it is being hosted by the White Ribbon Alliance and moderated by yours truly again. So this has never happened in the 10 years that PMNCH has been holding the accountability breakfast, and you do not want to miss this because this special post-breakfast event will be raw, spontaneous, unscripted, and deep, focusing on grassroots and activist voices who will discuss how the main stage discussion aligns with realities on the ground, because we are not just here to talk about things that do not make sense to the people who matter most. That is the women, children, and adolescents across the world. And for today, the women, children, and adolescents in Africa. A link that you can use to join the after show will be posted in the chat box. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, I don't want to take most of your time because we have a really packed and interesting agenda for you. So allow me to introduce our opening video, Dear World Leaders by Mumbi Macharia.
They say you're on the menu if you're not seated at the table. Allow me to introduce myself. I am the girls in the pictures you commission of abject poverty. I know it sounds poetic, but I assure you, our lives are not an aesthetic. Perhaps you didn't know that I am the girl staying home from school because I don't have pads. My future, they took that. I am the girl walking to school with a stomach heavier than my book bag. This is my life. I am no different from the girl you heard about being sold off at 12 as a wife. I am not a charity case, but that's the picture you get. I see I am my grandmother's legacy. I come from a long line of matriarchal forces, rainmakers, healers, warriors especially. My mother and grandmother now say they hope I forgive them for bringing me into a world where my very existence is a transgression, where demanding change is mundane and violence against my sisters is just another Monday. This is to you, our world leaders, the ones who have our trust, a less than few. You made all these promises you said you'd pursue, so why does the mortality rate and gender-based violence still have the longest queue? Strange. So this is to let you know that if you want to buy my vote, I don't want notes. I just want change. Love is a verb. So I don't just want you to talk about it, I need you to be about it in every sector: health, economy, climate, community. This is your opportunity in every room to put my sisters first, even the ones still in the womb. We've come a long way. So I pray that the strides we made before the pandemic are not receding. We are pleading. Do not leave us behind. We have options but no choices, opinions but no voices. It's time, it's been time to rise, refocus, recover.
What a powerful way to open the accountability breakfast. Really pertinent issues raised by Mumbi of the daily struggles of women and children in this pandemic. Dear world leaders, some of you have tuned in today. Thank you. May you never cease to reflect on who you are ultimately accountable to. Now, ladies and gentlemen, please use the hashtag Accountability Matters on social media. We may not respond now, but we really value your feedback, and we are taking notes of all the comments and questions, and we'll use them to guide our work. PMNCH will be monitoring, and all partners will be looking at this to just see where they need to put more focus on. So feel free to engage them on social media and also on chat. Let us hear your thoughts, comments, and experiences. Also, please do note that we have translations in French and Portuguese, and this event is being live streamed on the PMNCH website, AMREF, and the Graham Marcel Trust, Facebook, and UNAIDS. At this point, let us delve deeper now into the accountability discussion. And to kick us off is the leadership dialogue hosted by none other than the phenomenal Right Honorable Helen Clark, PMNCH Board Chair and former Prime Minister of New Zealand. Helen, it is always so liberating to listen to you chair discussions. Over to you.
Thank you, Mercy, and greetings everyone, wherever you are in the world, from close to midnight in New Zealand. Well, as Mercy said, this is the decade anniversary of when PMNCH began holding accountability breakfasts on the margins of the high-level week of the UN General Assembly. I was at the one in 2019. It seems like the last century. We were in such a different world pre-pandemic. But, of course, we moved from that kind of breakfast in a hotel ballroom in downtown Manhattan in New York to these truly global conversations which can happen around the world, every region, different times of day, but we can all be part of the same extended conversation. And last year's online accountability breakfast like this was viewed by 2,500 participants at the time, and I'm told reached another 2 million plus people on social media later. So let's hope we can build on that again this year and involve as many people as possible in this conversation about accountability. Now, over the decade, PMNCH tells me there's been a shift in what we've been talking about and with whom we're talking. Citizen action and demand for greater accountability is now very much at the centre of PMNCH's work. Gender equity is intrinsic to health accountability, as is access to education, to livelihoods, to nutrition. And as we continue to advocate for universal health coverage and stronger national health information systems, we must always be informed and guided by what women, children, and young people themselves say they need and want for their own lives, including the need for respect, dignity, quality care, and freedom from abuse. PMNCH has 10 constituencies, uniting 1,200 organisations. It's the world's largest alliance advocating for women, children, and adolescents' health and well-being. And it's especially powerful when we speak together for accountability. And that's what the annual breakfast is about. And thank you all for joining. This session, we have leaders from a range of stakeholder groups to have a candid conversation about mutual accountability and to share their insights and lessons learned on how to strengthen accountability for greater equity and to reach the most vulnerable. Our panel has, in order of speaking, the Honourable Kwaku Agyeman Manu, Minister of Health from Ghana, Winnie Byanyima, Executive Director of UN AIDS and an Under-Secretary General of the United Nations, passionate and long-standing champion of social justice and gender equality. The CEO of Copper Rose Zambia, Natasha Kauma, a young advocate for sexual and reproductive health and winner of the 2017 Queen's Young Leaders Award. And then a true embodiment of he for she and advocate for pro-poor universal health coverage is Dr. Gitinji Gitahi, the global CEO of AMREF and co-chair of PMNCH's Strategic Advocacy Committee. So we're going to start the panel on a topic we're all passionate about, how to deliver accountability for those who are the hardest to reach. I understand a key recommendation coming out of Ghana's 2020 annual health sector review was about how to reach those hardest to reach through whole-of-government approaches and strengthening partnerships across sectors. So we have a question coming to the Minister from Charge Nurse Adwoa Achia Nkrumah, and we're going to play that question now.
Hello, my name is Adwoa Achia Nkrumah. I'm a peri-operative nurse and the charge nurse for theatre at Nyahu Medical Center. During the initial stages of the COVID-19 outbreak in Ghana, our healthcare system encountered quite a number of challenges, which included inadequate supply of personal protective equipment, and also there were issues with limited bed space in the ICUs in all health facilities across the country. Given the unprecedented challenges posed by COVID-19 to Ghana's health system, how has the Ministry of Health and its agencies, in collaboration with other line ministries, minimized disruptions to health services and nutrition services for the hardest to reach populations? Also, Honorable Minister, how will the Ministry of Health strengthen multi-sectorial partnership to improve health delivery system in Ghana? Private sector, for instance, had to make difficult decisions in terms of cost of PPE and other equipment while sustaining job during the COVID-19 era. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much to the charge nurse for her question. And let me bring in the Minister of Health from Ghana to address it. Minister, you have the floor.
Thank you, Honourable. Ghana's revised national health policy takes a whole of government and a whole of society approach to making Ghana's health system more resilient, equitable, and future-proof. It has 5 key objectives: to strengthen the healthcare delivery system to be resilient, to encourage the adoption of healthy lifestyles, improve the fiscal environment, improve the socioeconomic status of the population, and to ensure sustainable financing for health. I must admit and agree to the issues that were raised by Ajua, the in charge, who actually asked the question, that during the initial stages of the outbreak, it is true, our health system encountered a number of challenges. Inadequate supply of PPEs, limited bed space at ICUs, but we tackled the pandemic to the extent that our normal service delivery, especially targeting women and children, weren't severely disrupted at all. They weren't. We moved very quickly to try to provide PPEs across the country. We formed a commodities group. We started utilizing women and other textile manufacturing companies to try to produce PPEs in country ourselves. And the commodities group, supported by our military, were actually moving things across the country to make sure that our health workers and all those who are attending facilities had these at their stations where they were actually working. Initially, with the fear factor in the pandemic, the OPD attendance actually reduced. And we had to mobilize our community health committees and just assemblies, our local governance system, to actually whip up interest to bring back attendance of mothers and children to actually take service delivery that has been routine and normal. If you look at our indicators, we never had serious disruptions, as has been evidenced by the type of indicators that we actually have. I use the word severely, but we had some challenges that bit. The proportion of pregnant mothers making at least 4+ antenatal care visits has not been very encouraging in the last 5 years anyway. It increased to 63.2% to 58.4% between 2016 and 2019, before increasing marginally again to 58.6% even in 2020, where we have close to 10 months in severe pandemic situation. If you look at our immunization situation, we did close to 96.9%, 97% coverage, even in the pandemic. If you look at our postnatal care, proportion of mothers attending postnatal care saw some significant improvement during the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic, increased from 47.3% to 54.2% between 2016 and 2019, and further went up to 55.9% even in 2020, where we have the pandemic. Our skilled delivery supervision, during the outbreak, the percentage of supervised skilled personnel increased from 55.5% to 59.1%. So you could see these are samples that we have picked, that though pandemic had severe impact on the nation, but when it comes to care delivery, we didn't have challenges that much. One of the reasons was the fact that in our first wave, we have two big epicenters. These were our two large cities, Accra, the capital, and the next one, Kumasi. That is where we saw much infections. And in some parts of the rural communities and the regions upcountry, for about 5 months into the pandemic, when everybody was struggling looking for PPEs and ICU beds and what have you, we never had infections in quite a large number of districts and some good portions of our country. And so care delivery was ongoing and never got disrupted. Our supplies were good. Our vaccines for traditional immunization were quite good. Our doctors and our nurses did so much to keep everybody at bay. We tackled even the pandemic from a whole government approach. We set up a task force unit in the presidency, chaired by our president, and we're meeting once every week. And we brought in ministers like Interior, Defense, Women and Children Affairs, Communication, Information, where we were doing our risk communication with them. So we just embraced almost everybody. Minister for Local Government and Decentralization. And therefore, health had a situation where we had collaborators, supporters, and partners to actually tackle COVID, right, as a holistic approach from government side. So we had space to continue to put the priority that we were putting on mother and child care the way we were doing it even before pandemic. And I must tell you what we have done to reach the hardest to reach. We have installed and we are distributing vaccines and essential medicines, right, with drone technology. And I think this is the largest we have in the world. We have 4 good centers that sends medicines and vaccines to places where we cannot easily reach. We have our primary healthcare system. That is a model in Africa. We are doing what we call CHIP compounds, community health services places, where we have tried to reach outliers, the rural communities, with small facilities manned by trained nurses and physician assistants. So you wouldn't walk and drive so much into a district hospitals. We call these sub-district facilities, where we have our health workers closer to the people. They did a lot of communication, advising people on COVID protocols, hand washing and face mask wearing, and all those things were actually done. Until this year, when we saw the development of vaccines and we started seeing hope that vaccines may actually work for us. Again, the same task force that we used was used. And we brought in some more ministers and more protocols so that we started working on our communication and trying to reduce vaccine hesitancy and this advocacy about the harm that vaccines can do to people. So before we actually started receiving our first COVAX vaccine delivery in our country, we have done so much in terms of information dissemination and communication to take the fear out. And to top it all, when we receive these vaccines, we have developed our vaccine deployment plan that was being implemented by our traditional expanded program on immunization that is situated in one of our agencies for care delivery, the largest one, Ghana Health Service. So we didn't do anything at all. They were there ready, got some training within a very short time, and we had vaccinators across the country to actually go in to do that. We prioritized because we didn't have adequate vaccines like others. So we started with, health workers and people above the age of 60, and some very critical workers in our country, such the administration will not break down. So you look at the judicial service, we look at the parliamentarians, we looked at other government workers, not forgetting the private sector. Right. We also collaborated with the private sector, even in the COVID battle. So our testing centers and things, we actually introduced guidelines that allow private sector people to actually set up to begin to do COVID testing and whatever that we needed to do. So we concentrated and made sure that our normal health sector indicators wouldn't be seriously disrupted by the COVID pandemic and what interventions we have to put in there. So that is where we are. And now that COVID has gone down, though we are in the third wave, we have been very, very, very meticulous in trying to make sure that we get vaccines to vaccinate, because we believe that will actually cut the spread and will help us actually get ourselves back on course. So we are there, and we will never lose sight of what we are supposed to do for our women and children. In terms of equity considerations, and as part of our 2021 Health Summit, we've set up a committee to work on modalities for our deprived area incentives, and they have actually commenced work. We have situations where we train health workers, we want to send them to rural communities, they resist. But we are looking at what incentive packages we can establish to get them into the area. We are doing some work within HR system to try to see how equitably we can distribute our health workers, medical officers, and our, nurses and midwives. Again, during the COVID, the type of challenges that we're facing brought out the fact that we needed to actually establish more infrastructure and build a more resilient health infrastructure. The president announced his intention as a policy to actually establish and build new hospitals, about 101 of them, This is commencing in earnest. We launched the first site as a symbol of all the 101 hospitals to be done. And this is on course. We're expecting that within the next 18 to 24 months, all of these hospitals will come on stream to support our health system infrastructure. So we are strengthening using COVID situation to actually bring in COVID vaccines, which are classified as ultra-low temperature vaccines. And we have now added on to the normal cold chain equipment that we have, so that even after COVID, we shall have built a more resilient cold chain equipment to support our immunization program for our children and other vaccines that may be introduced going forward. Let me thank you, Honorable Helen Clark, for this engagement. I'm grateful.
Thank you so much, Minister, and there are many lessons to be drawn from what you've told us about the way Ghana has managed through this pandemic. Now, we have a question on gender, health and inclusion from community activist Mpilo Shabangu in South Africa. Winnie Byanyima, head of UNAIDS, Winnie leads an organisation which has long been known for advancing multi-sectoral action for accountability in the UN system. So let's turn to Mpilo's question. We'll ask the Minister from Ghana to mute his mic. Thank you. And let's hear from Mpilo and then bring Winnie in to answer that question. Please play the video.
My question really will now have to relate to how COVID has revealed to us the fact that gender inequalities, which have really been embedded at a systematic and institutional level, continue to negatively affect women and girls, especially when it relates to their ability to protect themselves from violence, unwanted pregnancy, HIV, and other infections. And so, ma'am, I'd like to know, what are some of the lessons that we can take from the global AIDS pandemic response, as well as other countries' AIDS responses which were effective? I especially ask this for women and girls who find themselves in humanitarian, conflict, and fragile settings. Moreover, how can women and girls be empowered and supported so that they themselves can bring their needs and priorities up on a national and local level agenda and be part of the decision-making processes that affect their bodies and will also ensure that their needs and wants are heard? Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I'm bringing Winnie in now. We did have quite a lot of background noise there, so can I ask everyone who's on screen to turn your mics off when you're not speaking? It's very helpful. Winnie, please come in.
Thank you very much, Right Honourable Helen Clark. Thank you for involving me in this panel, and greetings to all the panelists. Thank you for your question. During the peaks and surges of COVID-19, we've seen just how differently men and women, girls and boys are impacted by a pandemic. Children have suffered in a very particular way. 90% of school children globally were unable to attend school for a period of time. 10 million girls were at risk of early marriage. That's a gender difference. And the demand for gender-based violence services went up 5 times. That's a particular need for women and girls. 23 million children missed out on basic vaccines and routine immunization in 2020. That's about 4 million more than 2019. So we see the impacts on girls, on women, on children generally being very specific and of huge consequences for their lives. The Lancet reported that global maternal and fetal outcomes have worsened since this pandemic, that maternal depression has increased. So all the evidence is there of a gendered impact of COVID-19. And therefore, we need to see a gendered response. Before COVID, but let's be clear, before COVID-19, health systems were already failing poor women and girls and children. That's a fact that we need to reckon with. For example, in 2019, right before the crisis, 64 countries in the world were spending more money on external debt service than on their healthcare systems as a share of total government revenue. 64 countries, many of them in Africa. Ghana and Zambia paid 4 times more in external debt servicing than they invested in health systems before the pandemic. So even before the pandemic, many African countries where their debt service repayments were mounting and they were crowding out expenditures on health, education, and social protection. That is the situation Africa found itself in just before the crisis. But now, where's the solution there? There's been a temporary debt suspension. It was agreed for some countries, but it failed to achieve the right level of impact. It was too small. It reduced the debt repayments to the same level that revenues were falling. So no extra resources were made available to deal with this crisis. This can't be the way out of a pandemic. We need to ensure everybody's right to health and pay attention to those most in need. So let's see, when there is such low investment in health, what this has meant. It has meant that the solution is to crowd in what they call the private sector to invest, and then to charge fees for health services. Right across Africa, more than 40 countries charge some form of user fees to ordinary people to access the health system. 2/3, in fact, of African countries charge these user fees. What does this really mean? It means you see that a pregnant woman comes to a hospital to deliver, delivers her baby well, and is then held in the clinic until she has paid the user fees for having given birth in a clinic. First, you contribute to your country, deliver someone who is going to be part of the future labor force. You're committing to raise this child until they're an adult, and you are chained to a bed to pay for delivering that child. What an injustice to women. What an injustice to the baby. So we have health systems that are poorly invested in, very low investment. It was so good to hear Ghana speaking about the minister that having been hit by this crisis, they are coming out to invest more in health systems, to increase the infrastructure and the services. We need to learn that from the crisis. So what do we learn from HIV? Exactly these lessons. One, that to beat a pandemic, you need a global plan. The pandemic is global, the solution has to be global. 2 years into the pandemic, we don't have such a plan. Thankfully, we have a plan for HIV. This is what I lead, a joint program of the United Nations coordinating a global response, donors putting in their money, developing countries fighting hard with their own resources. And we are now with 27.5 million people on treatment, living good lives. And we still have to reach another 10 million to call it ended. But we'll get there because there's a global plan and global solidarity. The second lesson is equal access to health technologies, that without equal access to medicines, to vaccines, you can never end a pandemic. Now, what we are seeing is, we all know it's vaccine apartheid. President Ramaphosa has called it. And Helen, to your credit, you wrote an incredible report. If the world follows that report, we could be out of this crisis in a year. But the political will, sadly, is not there. Companies are holding on to their knowledge and their know-how, and supply is short, prices are high. Less than 2% of our people in Africa have been vaccinated, while in rich countries, they are declaring almost victory with 80% numbers fully vaccinated, going for a third shot. This is not a way out of a pandemic. We need that access to health technologies. We need that equal access to the vaccine. That means more production. That means every region being able to roll out at the same time. This is an issue close to my heart. 12 million lives were lost in Africa when these antiretrovirals were already on the market. We must learn from history and save lives. And I know many of you here are working hard to achieve that. So coming now to human rights and women's rights, the question you particularly touched on. Again, HIV pandemic taught us that without putting human rights of everyone and women's rights at the center of a response, you'll never get there. It's common sense. We're now in lockdowns. What are lockdowns? They are preventive measures. If you're asking people to social distance, to sanitize, to stay at home, if you don't involve women in their communities to do this, how can you get it right? How can a government know how to social distance in a crowded market better than a woman who works there? How can sanitizing, an issue for women who fetch the water, not be therefore, not why can't she be put in the lead to shape those very preventive measures where she's at the center of? So women's rights are critical. Human rights are critical in a response. Respecting them, promoting them, and putting communities at the center of responses is the key to winning against a pandemic. So my sister who asked on my daughter, I think you're a young woman. I can call you my daughter. This question you asked, the answer to it is that without putting communities at the center of a response, prevention, testing, treatment, without putting rights of girls and women at the center, we will not solve this problem. So with due respect, Mr. Minister, I heard you say you've involved everybody in the response to the pandemic. I hope that means that you've got gender balance in your structures from the governmental level, national, right down to the community, that women are in all their categories, rich women at the top, poor women at the base, girls are part of national structures for responding. That's a lesson from HIV. Helen, I could go on if you gave me more time, but I know there are others who need to speak. Those are the main lessons I'm giving. A global plan and solidarity with financing is part of the plan. Equal access to health technologies, medicines, vaccines, all of that. And putting human rights and communities and women's rights at the center. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Winnie. And indeed, there's much to learn from the response to HIV and the way in which impacted communities have been put at the centre of the response. Thank you so much. Moving to our next question, and it's from youth to youth, I think we can describe it. Africa has a youthful population, and it's driving change, it's assertive, and it is holding its leaders accountable. The drive and energy of this young generation will help build a fairer and more equitable world. Natasha is a youth advocate, and we have a question for Natasha from another youth advocate who would like to hear Natasha's reflections on reaching the most marginalised youth in this digital world. So over to Naledi Katsande from Zimbabwe. Please play that question.
As a fellow youth activist, we know that the digital communication is increasingly becoming a vital way to push forward the agenda on SRHR for women and adolescents. But in Africa, only about 40% of youth have access to digital communication. Most of these are men. In Africa as well, we talk of the high cost of data, which bars adolescents from connecting to the rest of the world. Again, poverty in Africa bars parents from being able to access or to purchase gadgets or smartphones that enable their adolescents to connect to the rest of the world. Given these gaps and challenges, from your experience, what do you think can be done to enable adolescents to access essential health services and to claim their rights?
Please, Natasha, come in on this one.
Thank you very much for that question. Mulishani Wonse, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you so much for having me on this platform. I'm greatly honored to be in this leadership dialogue as a young professional from Zambia. I come from an organization known as Rose, which is Zambia's largest and most robust youth-led organization. And most of our work is around equipping young people with skills and services that enable them to be happy, healthy, and living to their full potential. It is true that when you look at the African continent, only 40% have access to the internet. Most of this could be attributed to poverty and lack of investment in infrastructure, likely due to conflicting priorities. According to the World Bank reports in Zambia, COVID-19 has increased the poverty headcount from about 55% in 2019 to about 58% in 2021, and this is disproportionately higher in urban areas. Now, to zone in on what works and what doesn't, what we have seen is that the use of traditional media platforms for young people does not work. There has been a concentration on television and radio for airing of school programs and dissemination of information, but young people are telling us they are not listening to those. At national level in Zambia, only about 40% of the population have access to a radio and 37% have access to a television. So there's need to go beyond the mainstream media platforms, the mainstream platforms, in order to reach young people, which brings me to the PMNCH call for action, which talks about multi-sectorial responses. There's need to leverage on other platforms that are working. For example, the digital penetration for mobile money is even greater than the amount of people or the percentage of the population that has access to clean and safe water. So that calls for investment in some of these platforms. But what does work is putting young people at the forefront in these conversations. In Zambia, we've been reminded of the power that young people have in democracy, in the just ended election. And as young people in Zambia, we want to use this power for accountability and for speaking up and speaking out about sexual and reproductive health and the needs of young women. As young people, we are generating our own evidence from the facilities that Rose Zambia supports. We've seen that during the COVID pandemic, youth-friendly spaces have increased attendance by 25%, while generally as a country, our teenage pregnancy rate has remained high at around 28% over the last 10 to 15 years. So while we're investing in evidence generation, there's also a need to invest in data disaggregation so that we can have evidence-based decision-making. There's need to fund organizations such as Rose and also fund youth mobilization, because young people have the power to speak. Young people have the power to even encourage things like vaccinations, for example. Vaccination coverage is currently at only 1.7%, and there are many reasons, but there's opportunities for using digital innovation tools for people in groups, as opposed to thinking of digital innovation for an individual. We are using group listenerships, we are using group engagements while we wait for our leaders to step up and support us through digital investments and infrastructure. I've been asking people this question mostly from the leadership perspective, but even my fellow young people, is before we ask for more innovation, have we maximized the platforms we already have? Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Natasha. You know, each of our speakers has touched on the issue of vaccines, and of course, the lack of supply to Africa has been truly reprehensible. Maybe 3.2% of Africa's population has now had 2 doses. It's extremely low. And as we meet today, the US President Joe Biden is convening a summit in New York where he's calling on global leaders to make new commitments on fighting the pandemic, including by moving to vaccinate fully 70% of the world population within the next 12 months. Now, we have a question from Maureen Indikana, who is a pharmacist and public health practitioner in Tanzania. And we're going to ask Maureen to put her question to Gitinji Gitahi. So please play Maureen's question.
Hello, I am Maureen Indikana, speaking to you today from the beautiful Tanzania. I am a pharmacist and a public health practitioner, and I have a question for you today. Where do you see advantages or limitations, if there are any, in working with the private sector as part of country-led efforts in Africa towards improving vaccine equity?
Gitinji, you have the floor.
Thank you, Right Honorable Helen Clark, and thank you very much, Maureen, for your question from Tanzania. I hope the people of Tanzania are great. We are happy. I am personally very happy at the change of policy in Tanzania, because that is the first answer to the question you asked, that actually the people need access and the government needs to open the pathway for people to find the access they need. Many of the speakers have reflected on the fact that Africa continues to suffer vaccine appetite, vaccine inequity. I think the numbers are that less than 4% of the African people currently are fully vaccinated. And if you look at the vaccine distribution, whereas Africa has acquired only maybe 2% or so of the global vaccines available, it accounts for 17% of the global population. So there's a major issue here of inequity, and that must be resolved. And I think the question you're asking is, how do we bring in the private sector in a publicly led approach to ensure that we actually close this vaccine gap? The one thing I would like to say is that in many of the countries that I've seen where vaccination is high, the mortality rates have dropped. I was looking at numbers for Europe, and when you look at the average case fatality rate for COVID-19 from the time it started to now, and you look at the case fatality rate post vaccination of up to 60% of its population, the case fatality rate has dropped almost 60%, which actually says vaccines work, vaccines help the economies to reopen, vaccines help society to get back to work. And when you look at, therefore, the inequity in Africa, it is largely affecting women, girls, and children, because the closures, the economic downturn, the inability for the informal sector to move on, which is facilitated by absence of vaccination, and obviously also the burden of healthcare costs is heavier on women, girls, and adolescents, and therefore every day we delay vaccine equity, we actually increase the burden of women, girls, and adolescents. That is the reality. So maybe to come down also to your question, to then ask what we need to do. What I've seen across all the 35 countries we work in Africa as AMREF and assisting governments is that you need a congruence of what I call two trinities. Two trinities. The first trinity is the trinity of vaccines, vaccinators, and vaccinees. And within that trinity is a very clear role for private sector, because private sector is the one driving access to vaccines. And as been said by Winnie earlier, if the private sector could truly hold itself accountable and come to the table, accelerate licensing, transfer of intellectual property, and ensure that there is scaling up of availability of vaccines, including supporting the Africa manufacturing plan for vaccines by supporting Africa Union, Africa CDC, and moving faster, then we would get closer and closer to closing this gap. The next part of this trinity of vaccines, vaccinees, and vaccinators is obviously the other area of vaccinators. The private sector, as you look at it holistically, goes beyond the for-profit private sector. It is also the faith-based civil society. There is this whole agenda of service delivery, and the private sector plays a critical role, especially for non-for-profit private sector. You know, NGOs like ourselves, faith-based organizations, they close the last mile gap by ensuring they can mobilize communities and go farthest and ensure that person who is last is first in vaccination. What I have seen is that even where there is global inequity for vaccine access, there is in-country inequity because vaccination that have happened so far are urban and they are male. We have seen in Kenya specifically, I can reflect that the 55% of the people who've been fully vaccinated are men and only 45% are women. So you can tell there is also inequity in country. Now, the private sector, whether for-profit or not-profit, can actually close this gap. But the key question we have to answer at the end, as Winnie was asking, is who pays? This is where the government must come in to provide equitable financing for healthcare, because vaccines are free in many countries, and therefore private sector is shying away from actually assisting the government to provide vaccines because they are not being paid for. We need to find an equitable payment financing mechanism, and that's universal health coverage. That's the first trinity: vaccines, vaccinees, and vaccinators. The second trinity is the trinity of government, private sector, and civil society. Those two trinities must work together if you have to close this gap. And those two trinities must be connected by the glue of accountability, the glue of equity, the glue of regulation and timeliness. In 2018, the PMNCH Accountability Breakfast requested me to moderate the launch of the accountability framework for private sector. At that point, the question was, who will hold the private sector accountable for equity, for women, girls, and children? And the conclusion is that we need an effective regulatory mechanism, publicly led, that holds the private sector accountable to ensure that we protect public trust and therefore protect public interests. The final question, which you won't answer now, is the question of UHC, that the government must provide an enabling environment for participation of private sector, which is led by public finances, regulation, and public trust to enable private sector to serve public interests, most importantly for this conversation, to close the vaccine equity gap. Thank you, Maureen, for your question, and back to you, Right Honourable Helen Clark.
Thank you, Gitinji. Well, what an amazing panel we've had, speaking with such passion on our topic of health equity for Africa. I think the Minister from Ghana spelled out how it is possible to continue to deliver to women and children, even in the midst of the worst pandemic the world has seen in more than a century. And I like the way that Ghana approached the coordination across government departments and sectors through the pandemic, led from the top. This has been so critical to successful responses. Winnie spoke passionately about the need for equity globally and has been a leader in the people's vaccine movement to try to get more equitable delivery. And you're right, Winnie. Beating this pandemic, it needs a plan, it needs dedicated financing, it needs vaccines, therapeutics, prophylactics, PPE, oxygen supplies, you name it. These are global public goods in a pandemic. They can't be hoarded, they can't be stored, they've got to be shared equitably. And among the many recommendations from our independent panel for pandemic preparedness and response, we talked about replacing Act A as a standing mechanism by a mechanism that's founded on the principle of global public goods, not a market principle. Thank you, Natasha, for speaking for equity for youth, how we reach youth, how youth get input too. And then, Gitinji, you've been such a wonderful advocate for universal health coverage and the support from someone like yourself for finding ways of private sector being held accountable is just so important. You also made the very important point that African manufacturing sector stands ready to manufacture vaccines given the chance. This is so critical to get that knowledge and technology transferred out so that it's not hoarded and stored, frankly, by a few Western countries in a few places. And that would make such a difference longer term to have that capacity built in Africa itself. So thank you so much, all of you, for being such a dynamic panel, and we really appreciate you making time for the PMNCH Accountability Breakfast. Back to you, Mercy.
Wow, Helen, thank you very much for such a wonderful panel, really inspiring. And for me, the take home is that we cannot afford to be individuals trying to protect our own spaces, and the importance of having mutual accountability, basically how we can work together to get the most out of each other as we seek to deliver for women, children, and adolescents in Africa. So thank you so much for those great insights. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we have another video coming up right now on leaders from Africa are uniting to focus on access and action on UHC, supporting women, children, and adolescents, especially in this COVID-19 era. And it's coming right up before we move to the next elements.
What if every country in Africa had access to quality and universal health services that are equal, affordable, and accessible for all, especially during this COVID-19 pandemic?
What if every community had access to basic services such as clean water and good hygiene?
What if every mother had access to the life-saving medical services she needed while giving birth?
With COVID-19 pandemic quickly spreading across the globe, countries have transitioned a lot of resources and attention to fighting this deadly pandemic.
With a partnership to accelerate COVID testing, in abbreviation PAC, we aim to build testing capacities to strengthen universal access to testing and health services for all Africans.
Scaling up testing capacity is part of our broader universal healthcare agenda to not only contain the COVID-19 pandemic, but be better prepared to contain all future pandemics as well.
With an already overstretched healthcare system because of other major challenges such as malaria, pneumonia, and HIV,
it's not difficult to see that in the middle of this global pandemic, Africa is likely to bear the heaviest burden.
I, Jakaya Mrisho Kikwete, former President of the United Republic of Tanzania, and my foundation, teaming up with the African Union, Africa CDC, and Access Challenge, call upon African leaders, partners, and persons of goodwill to use this pandemic as a wake-up call and an opportunity to invest in comprehensive universal healthcare systems.
These investments in our health systems meant for the pandemic can actually be used to build sustainable universal health coverage, UHC, systems with a long-term view towards not only responding to COVID-19, but all future pandemics.
Health systems that can shield people instead of people shielding health systems. Health systems that can guarantee each one, everywhere, unfettered access to affordable and quality health care. A health system that is designed to cater for all diseases, all health crises, all the time.
Leaders can grab this opportunity to become universal health heroes to strengthen health security and go down in the history books as leaders who reformed healthcare systems for their people.
This campaign is not advocating to meet the need of one mother, one disease, or one virus.
We are campaigning for universal access to health and strengthening BHC systems so that we can meet the needs of all mothers and for all future pandemics.
I call upon you to take the COVID-19 pandemic as an opportunity to invest in a strong community health system and health infrastructure to not only be able to respond to COVID-19, but be prepared for all future pandemics.
One by one.
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 One by one, we will continue to fight for health for all in every country of Africa to achieve a healthier, more equitable post-COVID world of tomorrow.
I support this campaign.
I support health for all.
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 I support healthcare for all.
I support health for all.
I support Healthcare for all. I support UHC. I support all of us fighting for the rights, the well-being of women, children, and adolescents. And I am sure the person who's coming to speak to us next definitely feels the same. Ladies and gentlemen, let us get some remarks from Estonian President Kasti Kaljulaid, who's the first global advocate of the United Nations Secretary General for every woman, every child.
Good afternoon, evening, or morning, depending on where you are joining this accountability breakfast. It's my pleasure to meet again BMNCI network and so many friendly and hardworking faces, although again virtually, but maybe this is the way we want it. It's very interesting to listen how our plea to have an equitable healthcare model, healthcare system is resonating in the context of the pandemic. And I'm particularly happy recognizing familiar faces also from the African Union to discuss this issue. And you know why? Because if you look to the European example, then even if European countries do not have a common healthcare policy, and even if we normally operate in healthcare pillar totally alone, then during this pandemic, it was obvious that we could agree based on our other areas of cooperation. We could agree on a mechanism which guaranteed that the richest people in Europe, taken as a nation, were vaccinated exactly at the same speed as everybody else. And it was interesting to see even, I mean, when you visited Italy or Spain or Norway or Finland, everywhere the rates were more or less the same. I mean, and they moved ahead, well, depending on the efficiency of a national system in unison. And this made me think now, listening also to your discussions here, where I share many thoughts which were spread, particularly the role of the private sector in upping the production volumes. This makes me think that we should really grab this opportunity of this pandemic and realize that you cannot build ad hoc accountable systems, which means that now, having had this experience, when in a year's time, private sector has met the demand and there will be plenty of vaccines, question of always will remain who pays, but I mean, this can be resolved, as we all know, then we shouldn't throw this experience away, but we should actually actively start preparing through other, this kind of cooperating unions, be it African Union or elsewhere regionally, to make sure that in such a crisis, we will restrain our individual purchasing power so that we could, as a region, move ahead. And it is a strategy which will pay off, because if you move as a continent quicker ahead together, this of course means that you can at least regionally start to remove restrictions together, and you will fall in step, helping also to recover your economy and so on. And such a system actually did exist in this pandemic. It was Europe, and I am quite sure that there will be a lesson to be drawn from that. What concerns the current availability of the vaccines, then Estonia, for example, has decided that we will contribute to the rest of the world. I mean, per every grown-up Estonian who has got the vaccine, we also donate one dose. But even we find that the production levels are not yet up to the niveau to help us to fulfill this commitment, not only financially, but also in the practical terms. And here I very much share the position of many here, that our enterprises and businesses also have a certain social responsibility. That has to be a negotiating mechanism according to which they will be able to recover the cost which went into developing. And also we will be able to spread the results of these development so that those who were not part of the development can still go and start manufacturing these vaccines. It has to be a negotiated process, but it is possible. This is definitely sure. I'm very grateful for Helen to arranging this discussion right now when we are still all concentrating on how to get the global population vaccinated, because I know how it normally would go. I mean, in a year's time, we would say, well, this is behind us and we don't need to work anymore on these streams which we now have. But the biggest lesson indeed is that without universal healthcare as a norm, this kind of international cooperation also cannot happen. Because if you do not feel universally and singularly responsible as an insurer of the last resort for your own people, then you are not going to overcome the other considerations, which, for example, is the market freedom, etc. And you will not try to create this kind of global network. You will not work towards making sure that your people will be getting the vaccines next time we might need things in this format. And it is indeed very important, therefore, to press our points and to continue fighting, saying that we can demonstrate to you globally there was a region. Yes, it was a good region, a rich region, but nevertheless, the international agreements within the region do not depend on the GDP per capita of the countries participating in it. Yes, the availability of the product for the whole region might depend on it, but how we distribute it, it doesn't. And this example needs to serve us for the future. So I will continue supporting this network, and also in my role as the global advocate for every woman, every child, I keep these examples which we have been discussing today in mind, and I will keep promoting them. If you invite me, of course, and if you have good ideas where to go, where to promote, I'm always ready to serve you. So thank you for listening.
Well, thank you very much, President Kalulai, and we really appreciate your graciousness and your willingness to be an advocate for women, children, and adolescents. And I am sure PMNCH and all the organizations that have tuned in here will take up that offer of using you and having you be an ambassador and just help us to front the health and well-being of women, children, and adolescents. So thank you very much again for your insights and for your leadership. We really appreciate it. And now, ladies and gentlemen, today we are not here to just, hold those accountable, but to also embrace the progress that has been made so far. Sometimes we focus so much on the 100% that we fail to see the 25% that has been achieved and look at how it has been achieved and how we can work on this 25% to help us reach the 80% and eventually 100%. So in this next session, we shall highlight the progress made by governments and especially the governments of Malawi and South Africa on their commitments to PMNCH's call to action on COVID-19. And then we'll have a discussion on how partners are supporting the government to accelerate progress and also identify gaps in implementation, and most importantly, how to address these gaps. So it's not just about holding people accountable and, talking about the negatives that are happening, but also really trying to appreciate those that are making commitments and working towards achieving these commitments. And to start us off, here is a recap of the commitments made by the governments, some of the governments we're talking about.
In this time of COVID-19, more than ever,
we urgently need our rights to sexual and reproductive health services,
quality, respectful, and dignified health services,
supplies and medicine,
family planning, free or affordable services.
Vulnerable and asylum-seeking families need food and shelter, clean water,
gender equality,
protection from violence.
Equitable access to high-quality services. We're talking of preventing sexual and gender-based violence. We're talking of ensuring that resources are made available, ensuring that lives can be saved. Lives of women, lives of children, lives of adolescents can be saved.
voting rights, they can create pressure to government for transformative change for the better services and reproductive health and justice.
The rate of child marriage have been increased during the COVID-19 situation. Many girls of Bangladesh are being pregnant due to their unconsciousness and for the reason of child marriage. Now we look forward to work with our government so that their promises make reality.
I feel that this will really help young women especially. It will help people in rural areas. It will help the youth. They've for a very long time suffered not just from inequality but from negative health outcomes.
We are just excited that, you know, our government really supports its community, its citizens, through their commitments to increase domestic funding towards reproductive, maternal, newborn and child health care.
Welcome back to Liberia, where we are following up on the commitment made by our government on PMNC's COVID-19 action. In July of this year, more than 20 community leaders came together to strengthen the capacity of civil society organizations to hold government accountable to its commitments. Youth organizations took part in discussions to identify national mechanisms to strengthen accountability to the community.
Welcome to Kenya. Here, young people from every part of the county have been involved in the delivery of the commitment. We have met and also shared information about our government's commitments and identified ways of holding them accountable. OAY has also engaged the youth through Twitter chats and Facebook Lives to disseminate the commitments through the social media platforms. We have put together a youth position paper on accountability for the commitments made by the government of Kenya.
Welcome back to Nigeria, where we have been ensuring that people know about the promises the government has made, and then we can turn them into reality. My colleague, Dr. Aminu Magashigaruba, the co-convener and founder of the African Health Budget Network, has taken to the airwaves to talk about this. Dr. Aminu, can you tell us more about the radio shows that you have been on?
Thank you very much, Toyin, for your question. We're not only discussing these topics with respect to the challenges in Nigeria, we are also discussing the policy, implementation, and investment in Nigeria. And we also link this, our radio conversation, with the COVID-19 call to action of the PMNCH and also Nigeria's commitment to the call to action.
Working with our communities and the media is an important partnership for following up on these commitments. This is what works for accountability in Nigeria.
Indeed, we have no time to lose. Very, very good commitments there. And now on the virtual sofa, please allow me to welcome from Malawi, Honorable Chrissy Kanyasho Kalamula, Deputy Minister of Health. You're very welcome. Hester Nyasulu from the White Ribbon Alliance in Malawi, and Honorable Bathan Debele, who is the Member of Parliament for Balaka West in Malawi. Really great to see you, and thank you so much for joining us. Greetings from Nairobi. And we are running behind schedule, so I will ask us to be very brief, 1.5 minutes, and then we roll. I know we can talk about these things for days on end, but let's be very brief. And I will start with you, Hester. From a civil society point of view, where do you think these efforts need more attention when you look at the commitments made by your government to the PMNCH call on COVID-19?
Thank you so much, Mercy. First of all, let me state up front that the CSO community was super excited that Malawi government committed to prioritizing women, children, and adolescents this time when we are faced with COVID-19. Yes, we do appreciate the fact that COVID-19 has compromised the delivery of health services across the globe, but we really need to see women, children, and adolescents being prioritized. Now, on our part, maybe let's look at what CSOs have done in Malawi in ensuring that we move forward. The first of all is that we've made sure that the commitments are widely known to policymakers and to the general public through the social media and awareness meetings. And secondly, we also made sure that the Parliamentary Committee on Health and other decision makers are also aware about these commitments and are clear about their roles in ensuring that government is accountable. And thirdly, at implementation level is where CSOs, like in the case of Malawi, had an interface meeting with the Reproductive Health Directorate that directly implements these commitments to understand the roadmap of how government will fulfill these commitments and to offer technical and financial support. And this is where the CSOs came in and were very much involved in the policy development. And also CSOs have used various high-level meetings to amplify these commitments. One such example is the recent Southern Africa Development Cooperation SADC meeting that was held from 17 to 18 August 2021. At that meeting, CSOs requested the First Lady, Her Excellency Monica Chakwera, that she should make a commitment that her office will support government's efforts in prioritization of women, children, and adolescents during COVID-19. I'm glad that Her Excellency made a commitment statement at the First Lady Summit, whose theme was the impact of COVID-19 on women and girls in SADC and how the region's recoveries can be gender responsive. Moving forward, CSOs will continue to work together alongside the government of Malawi to ensure that we are mutually accountable to these commitments made and even support technically and financially where needed. Thanks so much, Mercy.
Thank you, Esther. And indeed, the contribution of CSO is very, very important in ensuring accountability for the people that we are looking to serve, the women, children, and adolescents. And now to you, Honorable Bathurst. Your government has made commitments to the people you represent. How are you holding your government accountable to ensure the promises to your constituents are fulfilled, again, in relation to the commitments made?
Thank you so much, Mese. My name is Beth Mackenzie Ndebele. I represent the people of Malaka West in the eastern region of Malawi. I'll start talking about parliaments. We say parliaments are the link between the electorate and the government. And this unique position presents parliamentarians with an opportunity to be change agents through their fundamental functions of legislation, oversight, and presentation. The oversight role is a constitutional function in the Parliament of Malawi. We are very much aware of the commitments that the government of Malawi made to prioritize women, children, and adolescents in this COVID-19 era. Parliament of Malawi, through the Health Committee, which I belong to, is doing the best it can to provide oversight over these commitments. We are doing this through interface quarterly meetings. Parliament of Malawi, through the Health Committee, holds quarterly interface meetings with the Ministry of Health to monitor and track activities implemented and making sure that the allocated funds are being put to their intended use in prioritizing women, children, and adolescents. We also advocate for a budget increase. as a committee and also as parliamentarians here at the Parliament Committee on Health, we have continuously advocated for an increase in funding towards family planning. As you can recall, the committee has been very instrumental in creating a budget line in the national budget for family planning commodities. Through lobbying and advocacy, the budget allocation for family planning has been increased. Over the years and is currently at 200 million kwacha in the financial 2021-2022 year. And we also do partner collaborations. We have built effective partnership with different partners in maternal, newborn, and child health issues, such as the White Ribbon Alliance, UNIFIBA, and other non-governmental organizations. We support each other in advocating for issues affecting vulnerable groups. We also do field visits. The Health Committee in Parliament has conducted a good number of oversight visits to various hospitals to appreciate and get first-hand information to the extent of challenges faced by women and other vulnerable groups that guide us as parliamentarians to make decisions and advocacy. And also we have challenges.
Thank you, Honorable. Sorry, I'll have to cut you short. I know we can go on and it's really impressive all that you are doing to advocate for the rights of women, children, and adolescents, and also their health and well-being. I will just request that for any additional information or any additional notes of the good work that you are doing, please ask somebody to put that information on the chat box where everybody is watching. And then that way our audience can also see all the good things that you are doing. For now, because of time, allow me to ask Honorable Chrissy very briefly, if you can just tell us about strong institutions, because they are very important in ensuring accountability and ensuring that we are working towards the commitments, that there is progress. How are you ensuring that you have strong institutions that will accelerate progress on your government's commitments?
Thank you, Ms. Steve, for your question. Just to confirm indeed that Malawi made a commitment to prioritize women, children, and adolescents in this time of COVID-19. We stated in our commitment that Malawi will ensure that the sexual and reproductive health and rights strategy and the youth-friendly health services strategy incorporate issues of emergencies, including COVID-19. COVID-19 was not mentioned at all in our previous strategies, as it never to let you know that the SRHR strategy has been completed and approved, and now we are working on the YFHS strategy, and we hope to finalize by the end of December 2021. Malawi also committed to ensure that women, children, and adolescents are highly respected when receiving healthcare services. Respect and dignified care was a top demand women and girls made during the What Women Want campaign that was conducted in Malawi in 2019. And one would expect that this is indeed more in this time of COVID-19. To address this issue, Malawi committed to print, distribute, and display the updated Respectful Maternity Care Charter in all public health facilities. This will ensure that women and adolescents are aware of their rights and that healthcare workers are providing services with much respect to their clients. This work is still in progress, realizing the pressure that COVID-19 has brought on our health workers. Malawi committed through the President's directive to recruit a total of 1,380 additional healthcare workers. My ministry ensured that the commitment is accomplished. In addition to the 1,380, the ministry has also recruited 1,645 more health workers, totaling to 3,025 as of September 2021. And we have received additional funding from Global Fund, and to make more recruitment this year. We believe by demonstration of government of Malawi's commitment to ensure that we have funds available that support the needs of women, children, and adolescents.
Thank you, Chrissy.
COVID-19.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. There's so much to.
I know.
I would let me take this opportunity to thank all partners who have supported us this far, and we hope they will continue to provide both technical and financial support so that women and children and adolescents are prioritized in Malawi. And I thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And please, any additional info as well, please put it on chat, and I'm sure PMNCH will put this info on all the commitments made by the government app for everyone to access them. We also have a panel that is from South Africa, and on the virtual stage, please help me welcome Dr. Sibongiseni Maxwell Dlomo, the Deputy Minister of Health in South Africa, Levi Singh, Youth Strategy Officer of Sexual and Reproductive Health Africa Trust, and Joanne Van Dijk, my colleague in the profession. She is a senior journalist, the Kisa Center for Health Journalism. And I will start with you, Levi, or Levi. I'm not sure how they call you. I prefer saying Levi. Now, we the youth have been asking to be given a seat at the table, and saying there's nothing for us without us. How have we used this opportunity? Do you think, or what are the roles for the youth in South Africa? What are they doing to support the implementation of commitments made by their government?
Thanks very much, Mercy, and hi to the rest of the panel. It's great to have Ubaba Dlomo on the panel as well. Really quickly, I think there's been a lot of momentum that we've observed over the last 5 years with regards to adolescent and youth SRHR and health and well-being more broadly. But I think more specifically in the South African context, what we've done most recently is to build on some of this momentum that has been generated and also slightly disrupted by COVID-19. So what we've done is we have taken this unique opportunity to radically reassess where we are in terms of SRHR policy and legislation and offer guidance to our government partners in what we need to do better to bridge that policy on paper to policy in practice gap. And this has really been done through the introduction of a national action coalition, which is youth-led on sexual reproductive and health rights, responding to the Nairobi Summit commitments that were made in 2019, or even the most recent commitments that were made on SRHR and bodily autonomy at the Generation Equality Forum. But really looking at what is the positionality of young people in terms of informing the delivery of comprehensive sexuality education, informing the delivery and access of adolescent and youth-friendly services and facilities, and holding not just the state accountable, but also ourselves as youth-led and youth-serving organizations in terms of what we're doing with the seats that we've been been able to access around the table. I think moving forward, what we need to really consider our role in as young people to do is we've recently seen in studies that the most vaccine hesitant population, for instance, in South Africa is the 18 to 24-year-old age group. In August, we had opened up vaccine access for people younger than 35. So 18 to 35s are able to get vaccinated. As young people, I think we really need to tackle and respond to harmful disinformation, misinformation, and fake news in COVID-19 vaccines. We also need to encourage young people to get vaccinated. And most importantly, I think we need to raise our voices for vaccine equity and an end to vaccine apartheid, because we may be safe in South Africa at some point, but our neighbors in Lesotho, Eswatini, Zambia, Zimbabwe are not as safe as we all need to be. Until we are all safe, none of us are safe. So I would say join our action coalition on SRHR, but also look at how we can work towards the intersectionalities between vaccine access, adolescent youth health, well-being more broadly. Thanks, Mercy.
Thank you very much, Levi. Thank you very, very much. And Joanne, do you think the media is giving the commitments and the progress and the work that, youth and young people like Levi are doing, the coverage it deserves? or even as we seek to hold those in office accountable, are we appreciating as the media the progress that is being done?
Hi, yes. Well, I think at Becky CISA, the pandemic has kind of forced us to switch a little bit from our usual format, which was a long form kind of in-depth healthcare journalism. And we've switched to explanatory journalism to try and help people to understand how their world is changing. We've also tried to shine a light on how the lockdowns might be affecting women who are trapped with their abusers. When vaccines became available, we've been sharing the information on where can you physically go, where's the vaccine site closest to you so you can get the vaccine. But there have been some notable examples where we've been trying to play this informative role of the media, the educational role, and we haven't really been able to, because it's the information that we'd like to share and make and kind of democratize. It just doesn't seem to exist. The strongest example I have of this is that at Becky CISA, we've tried for half a decade to build a map of South Africa's public sector family planning services. We've taken a stab at it ourselves as an organization, tried to do journalism around it. But now it kind of just wasn't possible for us. And we've partnered now with an international organization, the Triad Trust, who has far more manpower, far more tech savvy than we have, to help us track where these government publicly funded services are. And despite now having dedicated data capturers, teams calling every day, the project is being hamstrung by the fact that telephone numbers for these clinics don't exist or they never answered. Just quite one harrowing statistic I'd like to point to is that since June 2020, these data teams have made more than 23,000 calls to facilities, and 77% of those calls have not been answered, whether it's the wrong number or the number doesn't exist or it just rings and no one's answering. So one of the commitments that South Africa has made to committing to access to information, that sounds like such an easy one that you could just skim over and it could be fixed with just a series of radio ads or something. But the dearth of information available is far more serious than that. It's almost certainly impacting the health and well-being of young women who are looking for a family planning service that has been legal for 2 decades in South Africa.
Wow. Yeah, those are some really good statistics there, and I wish you all the best in your projects. And now to you, Dr. Sibongiseni. Both Joanne and Levi mentioned talk about how they are trying to support the government to ensure that the commitments made are, there's progress on them and they are valuable to the people. What other support do you think you need as a government, especially from partners, to ensure that we accelerate the progress against the commitments you've made?
Thank you very much. And good day to all the leaders of the world who have logged in. To my fellow South Africans, Joanne and Levi, thank you very much for those contributions. Indeed, it is true what Levi say, that you cannot say we are safe until all of us are safe. Therefore, while we are recording success stories here in South Africa, but sometimes we are at pains that the progress that we have made has actually not been seen to be happening in the African continent. We have been given a target by our president to say, can we by December this year have vaccinated at least 70% of the adult population, which is 40 million. And we are delighted to indicate that to date, we are sitting at 29% of that population. At least 8 million people in the country are fully vaccinated, and at least 16 million doses have been used, depending whether you are on a Pfizer completed or still one way to go. So we are actually still looking for partnership. Currently in the country, we have said if you want us to open up stadia, we want us to open up the areas of entertainment, we therefore need the stars, the soccer stars, the sporting stars, and all those leaders to really be in the forefront. And we really are encouraged by the support that is coming from the sporting fraternity. We also are very happy with the progress that has been shown by the religious leaders. In fact, there's a church in one of our provinces that has got followers of 4 million. And that leader came publicly to vaccinate, and therefore that is one province, Limpopo, where we have seen at least more than 70% of the 60 years and above vaccinated. So we are now seeing there's merit in bringing the religious leaders, the traditional leaders, the artists and the soccer stars to come in there. But the young people have actually played, like Levi played a critical role, because they are the ones who are more on the social media. They see these myths and they talk about it, and therefore they ask for responses. But I think we are actually, I wish you could actually be having these good figures that I've just read, good for Africa, but now we are not yet there. But in our country, we really are very happy. We are stable to say, come the fourth wave, probably December, January, but at least we have more than 50% of our adult population vaccinated.
Wow, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Sibongiseni, and for being very brave and to the point. And now, ladies and gentlemen, that brings us to the close of our very short but sweet panel from Malawi and South Africa. Thank you very much for your grateful insights. And I will just encourage us to continue the conversation on social media. And any of our panelists, if there is something that you would like to communicate, please tag at PMNCH on social media. They're very active on Twitter, on Facebook, and they will be able to take up all this info and convey it to the people who are listening and watching us today. Now, I will welcome our next speaker, who will give the final remarks before we close this. A very phenomenal person who's the board chair of the Kofi Annan Foundation, Elhaji Asi. Please turn your video and your audio on, and welcome on the virtual stage.
Thank you very much, Mercy. Well, it is quite uplifting to hear so many leaders, activists, colleagues, professionals, committing to make a difference in the lives of women and children. Yet, it is quite, sobering, to realize that women and children have been facing multiple deprivations, over the years, and they continue to face the same now, including COVID-19, and even exacerbated by COVID-19. Okay, those women and children, they count among the hardest to reach, the most vulnerable, and they're there where we call, the last mile. And where is that last mile? It is our rural areas, these are our peri-urban dwellings, these are the conflict and humanitarian settings. And in all those places, while they appreciate the provision of water, sanitation, and hygiene, while they appreciate the provision of health care, they cry for peace. They cry for normalcy. They cry for dignity. And that is the basis, upon which, one can build to reduce the gaps, that we all trying to fill, over the years. And that last mile, the so-called last mile, should be our first mile of response. Let's start there, where the needs are greatest. Let's start there, where it is most difficult, and let's start there where people are hardest to reach. Over the years, we made, many promises, and then we delivered on some. Bravo. Today, we hear a lot of commitments, as well, and some progress are being made. Very good. But have we delivered really on all the promises we made? Have we really held on all the commitments, or have we broken them, over the years? I think the answer to that question will determine our level of accountability or lack thereof. If a commitment is made, if a promise is made, it has to be delivered on. Otherwise, there is no accountability. If there is no accountability, there is no trust. And then we will be in this vicious circle where leaders are no longer trusted and citizens, are left, on their own. And when times comes, when we need to mobilize and all come together, then there's a lack of trust, to move forward, in the same direction. We heard a lot of calls today, and all of them are pertinent and appropriate, and similar to many of those that we made also in the past. Let's have a global plan. Let's have a global solidarity. Let's have equal access to health technology, and now the vaccine debates, related to COVID-19 is putting it more and more on the table. Let's put communities and people at the center of the response. All of that pertinent, appropriate, we must do that. But when we do that, let us realize that it is not a favor, to communities. It is not a favor to women and children if they are involved, if their rights are respected, if we provide for them. Human rights, women's rights, children's rights are good for women and children. They're good for men. They're good for whole society. And that is really the reason why we need, a lot of partnerships. Gains are fragile, like most precious things. Precious things are fragile things. And then the gains we made are quite fragile, and we need to do everything possible to preserve them. Our children are also fragile. We need to do everything possible to preserve them and then to care for them and to support them and to protect them. And that's why, like in the spirit of PMNCH, then we just call again for partnership. And when we do partnership, let's start where it matters most. Partnership between men and women. Partnership between the public and private. Partnership between the leaders and the citizens. Partnership between the rural and the urban settings. And most importantly now, the partnership between this generation and the next one. So that we leave a legacy and we do not continue, the cycle of multiple deprivations that are being faced over the years. And finally, let's deliver on our promises. Let's deliver on our commitment. Thank you very much for a wonderful session and so many inspiring words and commitments. Thank you. Over to you, Mercy.
Thank you very much, Ilhaji Asif, for a beautiful way to end this conversation. Indeed, gains, like all precious things, are fragile. And if we are to recover better and strong as a global community, I agree that we cannot afford to ignore that one side of the globe is lagging behind. So, ladies and gentlemen, we have a responsibility to just stand up and be accountable to the women, children, and adolescents of Africa. You that has a voice, you that have made a pledge, a commitment, is accountable to the women and the children and adolescents in Africa. I am encouraging all of us to visit the PMNCH website, which has valuable resources, including the State of UHC in Africa report, the first ever global strategy country profiles, and others. So thank you so much for joining us today. And I hope you're coming with us to the after show, The Accountability Unscripted, where we will discuss how the main stage discussion aligns with realities on the ground and what needs to really happen for greater accountability for people everywhere. So once again, thank you so much for joining the 10th Partnership for Maternal, Newborn and Child Health Accountability Breakfast. And I hope you take these conversations beyond the screen to your house, to your homes, to your offices, and to your country. So thank you so much and have a nice remainder of your day. Bye.